Hi, my name is Natalie Quinn. When I was 20, my parents stole $30,500 from my college fund to hire a lawyer to save my sister from prison. They said, "You'll understand when you're older." But I didn't. All I knew was that everything I had worked for was gone. I canceled my enrollment, packed 2 bags, and left Ohio on a Greyhound bus in the middle of a rainy night. 10 years later, when they showed up at my mansion in Westlake Hills, standing at the door begging for more money, I only said one word. No. Have you ever had to choose between your family and your self-respect? Tell me, where are you watching this story from, before we go deeper? Thank you for being here right now, and for reminding me that I'm not alone. I grew up in Dayton, Ohio, in a beige 2-story house at the end of a quiet street lined with maple trees that shed golden leaves every fall. From the outside, my family looked like any other middle-class American family. My father was a construction contractor, my mother worked as an accountant at an elementary school, and there were 2 daughters, 4 years apart, Alyssa and me. But inside, there was an imbalance I sensed early on, even though no one ever said it out loud. Alyssa was the sun, and I was just the faint reflection circling her orbit. I still remember the day Alyssa turned 17. Dad took her to the Mazda dealership downtown, where flags fluttered over rows of shiny cars. She walked out of the showroom with a brand new red Mazda 3, gleaming like their shared pride. I stood outside, clutching my notebook to my chest. "Your time will come too," Mom said, patting my shoulder. 4 years later, when I turned 17, Dad tossed me the keys to an old Chevy Cavalier a neighbor's hand-me-down. The seat was torn, the AC was broken, and the radio picked up only one channel. "It still runs," he said, as if I should be grateful the car hadn't fallen apart yet. I didn't react. I had already learned what better than nothing felt like in that house. Alyssa was always the special one. When she came home late, Dad said, "She's just figuring herself out." When I forgot to take out the trash, he'd snap, "You never take responsibility." When Alyssa got caught shoplifting makeup at Target, Mom didn't yell, she drove to meet the manager and cried, saying her daughter had just made a small mistake. When Alyssa was caught plagiarizing an essay, Dad told the principal, "She's smart, just a little bold." Each time, they called lawyers, paid the fees, and repeated the same line. Family protects family. And when I made the honor roll, Mom just sighed. "Good job, honey," before turning back to her phone. When I was 15, I started to understand that fairness was never the Quinn family's strength. But instead of getting angry, I chose to observe. I learned to take notes, make charts, and rewrite everything to find the logic hidden behind those unfair decisions. I had a gray notebook I carried everywhere, with a sticker on the cover that said, "Build your own ladder." I'd cut that phrase out of one of Mom's old magazines and pasted it there the day Alyssa made the cheerleading team without even trying out, thanks to Mom talking to the coach. I sat in the bleachers, watching her beam with her pom-poms raised high, then looked down and wrote in my notebook, "If no one gives you a ladder, build your own." The older I got, the clearer the difference became. Alyssa could break curfew, have someone pick her up after parties, even sip wine at dinner, just to taste it. If I came home 15 minutes late, my phone was confiscated for a week. I used to think they loved her more because she was fragile, because she fell apart easily, and I didn't. But eventually, I realized it was because I didn't fall apart that they believed I didn't need love. In high school, I worked the night shift at the Speedway gas station, wiping counters, mopping floors. I tucked every tip into an envelope, carefully noting each balance. Every time I deposited money into the education savings account my grandparents had opened for me as a child, Mom would say, "Don't obsess over money. Scholarships are what really matter." But when Alyssa needed cash for a plane ticket to Florida to recover from a breakup, Mom withdrew the money and handed it over without hesitation. "She needs to heal emotionally," she said. I didn't argue. I just wrote one more line in my notebook. "Resilience makes people believe you don't need help." There was one time, late in the winter of my junior year, when the school held an award ceremony for outstanding students. I was chosen to give a speech, and everyone in my class expected my family to come. But when I walked up on stage to receive my certificate, the seats reserved for parents were still empty. The applause was faint, and a teacher came over to take a photo for me. After the ceremony, I went home and found my parents watching Alyssa's basketball game on TV. "Sorry, sweetheart," Mom said as I walked by. "We were going to come, but the car ran out of gas." I didn't say anything. I just went to my room, pulled out my notebook, and added a new sticker. Plan B. Always have your own fuel. Those years, Dayton didn't have much to offer, just cold winds and dreams trapped inside houses that all looked the same. I would often sit by my window, watching the buses roll south. I didn't know where my destination would be. I just knew that one day, I had to leave, not because I hated them, but because I needed to learn how to love myself more than they ever loved me. I thought about Alyssa a lot. Maybe in our small world, she was the only one allowed to make mistakes without facing consequences. Every time something happened, Mom would say, "You have to let her win, she's more fragile than you." But I began to realize fragility wasn't something you were born with, it was something nurtured by constant indulgence, and I didn't want to grow up to be a fragile person protected by lies. I wanted to be different. I wanted to create my own version of fairness, the one I never had. The pages of my notebook started to fill up tuition charts, scholarship timelines, college lists, part-time job plans. Every night, I checked off one small box, enough for the first semester. I didn't know what my future would look like. I just knew each word I wrote was a rung on the ladder I was building for myself, one step at a time. What I didn't realize was that, while I was busy building that ladder, my parents would one day be the ones to kick it down to save the daughter they still called their lost angel. I remember that spring afternoon vividly. The Dayton sky was gray, and a fine drizzle blurred the streets. I was finishing my shift at the gas station when my phone began ringing nonstop. It was Dad, his voice urgent. "Come home right now, it's serious." Before I could ask what happened, he hung up. When I walked through the door, the air in the house felt heavy. Alyssa sat at the kitchen table, head down, fists clenched. Mom was crying, and Dad stood by the wall, face like stone. On the table lay an arrest report, stamped with the seal of the Montgomery County Sheriff's Office. I skimmed through the page, my heart pounding. The charge: credit card fraud. They said Alyssa had stolen customer card information from the store where she worked and used it to make online purchases. There were at least 7 victims, with total damages exceeding $12,000. I can still hear Mom's sobs. "They're going to lock her up. This is a felony." Dad slammed his hand on the table. "We can't let that happen." Alyssa, in a gray hoodie, lifted her head. Her eyes were bloodshot, not with guilt, but with anger. "I just borrowed it. They'll get their money back." Mom wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "I know, sweetheart, I know you didn't mean to." I stood there, watching the scene unfold, and felt a wave of sick familiarity wash over me. The next day, they drove to meet a lawyer in Cincinnati, one known for handling white-collar crime cases. He didn't sugarcoat it, $35,000 to reduce the charge to probation. Mom came home with dark circles under her eyes, clutching her phone like it was a lifeline. "We'll manage," she told Dad. "We just need to help her this once. She'll change." I stood by the doorway, exhausted. "How?" "The house is already mortgaged." Dad looked at me, his voice hoarse. "We'll take it from your college fund." For a second, I thought I'd misheard. "What?" "The account's under your mom's name, $30,500. You know we set that up for you when you were little, but right now, the family needs it." I let out a dry laugh, somewhere between disbelief and heartbreak. "The family needs it? Or she does?" Mom cut in, voice trembling. "Natalie, this is your sister's life we're talking about. You can go to college later, but if she goes to prison..." I interrupted her, my voice steady. "If she goes to prison, it's because she broke the law. I'm not responsible for that." The air froze. Dad leaned on the table, his eyes cold. "Do you even hear yourself? We're not abandoning our own child in jail." I answered, trying to keep my voice steady. "What about me, Dad? I'm your child too." Mom burst into tears, but not for me. She grabbed Alyssa's hand, then turned to me, her eyes full of reproach. You can earn the money back, Natalie. You're smart, you'll find another way. Alyssa can't. Alyssa looked at me, the corner of her mouth curling with a mix of pity and disdain. Come on, little sis, family sticks together, right? Her voice was soft, but it made my blood boil. Family? I repeated slowly, each word cutting like a blade. Family doesn't steal each other's future to save a liar. Dad slammed his hand on the table. Enough, you don't get a say in this. The account's under your mother's name. We're using it whether you like it or not. I looked at all three of them, then took a step back. In my head, I heard the rain tapping against the roof, the clock ticking in the living room, and that old phrase echoing from my childhood. Family protects family. That was when I finally understood that phrase had never included me. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual. Mom was getting ready to go to the bank. I stood in the doorway and asked, "Are you sure about this?" She avoided my gaze and whispered, "When you're a mother, you'll understand." I didn't respond. When they came back, I saw Mom holding a withdrawal slip. The number printed in red, $30,500 withdrawn. Everything inside me collapsed. I stepped outside. The cold wind slapped my face as I struggled to breathe evenly. In the bank parking lot, I stared at the paper in my hand. It felt heavier than any stone. Years of saving, part-time shifts, scholarships, sleepless nights studying to keep my grades up, all of it condensed into that number. And now, it was gone in a few signatures. That afternoon, I sat in my room as sunlight filtered through the blinds. From the living room, I heard Alyssa on the phone, cheerful. The lawyer said it's fine, just probation. As if none of it had ever touched her. I looked out the window at the swaying maple trees and realized that if I stayed, they would take even more from me: my time, my dreams, my self-respect. That night, in my notebook, I wrote a single line. If they can steal my future, then I'll build another one without them. Hi. I closed the notebook and slipped it into my bag. The house was quiet except for the TV murmuring in the living room, where Mom still sat holding Alyssa. I heard Dad say, "She'll understand someday." I whispered into the darkness, "No, I already do." The next day, I walked into my high school counselor's office with my college acceptance letter still smelling of fresh ink. Her name was Mrs. Porter, a thin woman with silver hair always tied in a bun, and a soft but steady voice. When I told her I wanted to withdraw my offer from Wright State, she looked up sharply through her round glasses. "Natalie, are you sure about this? You've worked so hard for this moment. You earned a partial scholarship, and you only need to pay the rest to enroll this fall." I took a deep breath, pressing my lips together. "My family's going through financial difficulties," I said, repeating the exact lie my parents told me to use. "I think I should work for a year before continuing." She was silent for a long moment, her eyes full of quiet disappointment. "Natalie, you have so much potential. Don't let someone else decide your dreams for you." I smiled faintly, my throat tight. "I just need some time, that's all." But I knew I had just signed a sentence to postpone my own future, not because I chose to, but because they had already chosen for me. That afternoon, I stopped by the library. I sat in my usual corner, where I used to write my scholarship essays, and unfolded my congratulations letter from Wright State. I folded it neatly again and tucked it into my jacket pocket. I stared at the line that read, "We are excited to welcome you to campus this fall," and it felt like someone was reading a story that no longer belonged to me. I took out my gray notebook and wrote on the very last page, "I don't need a campus to begin. I just need a place where no one can take anything from me again." That night, I got home just before 11. Mom was watching TV, Dad was dozing off on the couch, and Alyssa was in the living room texting someone, giggling. No one asked what I had decided about college. No one said sorry. I walked past them quietly, went upstairs, and started packing 2 canvas bags. I didn't have much: some clothes, my old laptop, my notebook, and a framed photo of my grandparents standing in their lavender garden. I slipped my grandfather's fountain pen into my jacket pocket, the only thing that ever made me feel trusted. I placed my house key on my desk, right next to the bank withdrawal slip Mom still hadn't put away. The number on that paper, 30,500, glared back at me like an open wound. I wrote a short note: "Don't worry, I'll figure it out." No tears, no goodbyes. I just walked out the door, closing it softly enough that even the hinges stayed silent. The air outside was damp from the evening rain. I rolled my suitcase down the quiet street, past driveways blanketed in maple leaves, past glowing windows where mothers were still reading bedtime stories to their children. No one was waiting for me at the other end of this trip. Yet, strangely, I felt lighter. For the first time in my life, I wasn't carrying the weight of being the strong one. At the Greyhound station, the late-night terminal echoed with the announcement for the 11:45 p.m. bus to Austin, Texas. I picked that destination at random. Austin was warm, cheaper than New York or San Francisco, and most importantly, no one there knew who I was. I bought a one-way ticket with everything left in my account, just over $400. The ticket clerk looked at me and asked, "Visiting someone in Austin?" I shook my head and smiled. "No. Just visiting myself." Ha. As the bus pulled away from Dayton, the streetlights faded behind me. I leaned my head against the window, listening to the rain tapping on the roof, and felt something inside me both die and come alive. I didn't know what I would eat, where I would stay, or how I would survive. But I knew one thing for certain: I was never going back to that house again. 20 hours later, the bus pulled into the Austin station. The sunlight was blinding, a sharp contrast to Ohio's gray skies. The air smelled of roasted coffee and asphalt heat. I hauled my 2 bags onto the sidewalk, my hands trembling, but inside me bloomed a strange new feeling: freedom. I looked around: red brick buildings, small storefronts, a few young people with laptop backpacks walking by, country music drifting from a nearby bar. I took a deep breath, letting the warm wind weave through my hair, and whispered to myself like a promise: "It starts here." The first few months in Austin were long stretches of hunger, exhaustion, and nameless fear. I rented a shared room in an old house in East Austin, where 6 strangers squeezed into a space meant for 4. A college dropout who worked as a DJ at night, a Guatemalan cook, 2 bar waitresses, and a construction worker who slept by day and labored through the dark. My room was so small that when I stretched my legs, my knees hit the wall. At night, the sound of cars along Cesar Chavez mixed with the dry rattle of the air conditioner. I didn't dare call it home, just shelter from the rain. I worked as a busser at a small Mexican restaurant on Riverside, clearing tables, taking out trash, mopping floors, washing cups. $9 an hour, plus tips if the customers were kind. During the day, I picked up shifts as a barista at a coffee shop on South Congress, where one latte cost as much as one of my meals. Whenever I had time, I took Instacart orders, delivering groceries to glossy downtown apartments whose glass walls reflected my own image. Skinny, sweat, stained, but still smiling. I needed money. But more than that, I needed to feel like I was moving forward, even if it was only an inch at a time. Every night after work, I went to the Austin Central Library, a massive glass building by the Colorado River. It had free Wi-Fi, cold air conditioning, and long wooden tables facing the Lamar Bridge. I stayed until closing, learning HTML, CSS, JavaScript, sometimes SQL or Figma. I didn't know what I'd do with those strange lines of code. I only knew they opened a world I was never allowed to touch before. I studied product design case studies and scribbled in my gray notebook. A good product doesn't just solve a problem, it heals a pain. Whenever I felt exhausted, I thought of the withdrawal slip my mother held in her hand, the number $30,500 burned in red, like a scar that would never fade. Whenever I wanted to give up, I asked myself, if I stop now, does that mean they were right? That I was only good at enduring, not at standing back up? That question kept me awake through countless nights. By the 3rd month, I had saved enough to buy a 2002 silver Honda Civic. The engine coughed like a lifelong smoker, but it ran, and that was all that mattered. When rent went up, I chose to sleep in the car. I parked behind the library lot, covered the windows with my jacket, and used my backpack as a pillow. Each morning, I washed my face in a public restroom, drank instant coffee, and went to work. No one knew I was homeless. No one needed to. I was just another blurry face among thousands fighting to stay afloat. One early summer night the following year, a storm swept through Austin from hill country. The wind roared, rain crashed down in sheets, and I had to retreat to that old shared house, sleeping on the living room floor. The window leaked, and cold rainwater trickled across the floorboards. I pulled my jacket over my notebook, shielding it like it was the most precious thing I owned. Outside, the wind howled like buried memories clawing to the surface. I watched the water spread and whispered words that would stay with me for years. No one will ever take my future from me again. In that moment, the words felt like a vow. I knew then that I had no one left to rely on and I didn't need anyone anymore. I had come too far to turn back. When the storm passed, I began the slow, practical journey of rebuilding myself. Days were for work, nights for coding, weekends for freelancing, designing banners, optimizing websites, taking any task that paid. I opened a small account on Upwork and wrote proposals in stiff, broken English. My first client paid me $50 to fix a layout bug. It wasn't much, but I nearly cried from joy right there in the library. I used that $50 to buy a new external hard drive, a place to store every line of code, every project, every idea. I named the first folder Build Your Own Ladder. The name was a reminder the ladder I once promised to build for myself had finally started taking shape, one rung at a time. There were nights when I parked by the river, watching the city lights shimmer across the water, thinking about the house back in Dayton. I wondered if they ever mentioned me. Did Mom ever wake in the middle of the night, realizing she had traded one child's future to save the other? Or had I already faded from their memories, like I'd never existed at all? The answer no longer mattered. I knew that from the moment I stepped onto that Greyhound bus, I had become the only person responsible for my own life. 1 year passed, then 2. I wasn't rich, I wasn't famous, but I was surviving and, for the first time, without fear of tomorrow. I had a new laptop, a steady stream of freelance work, and a small but certain belief. Everything that's taken from you can be rebuilt if you're brave enough to start over. Every morning, I sat in front of the screen, watching lines of code pulse like the heartbeat of something alive. I didn't know where it would lead me, but I knew this much: this was my ladder now. No one could touch it anymore. On an April morning, during my 3rd year in Austin, my phone buzzed at 6 a.m. I had just fallen asleep after a long night of coding when I saw the email subject line. "We'd love to talk, Yardley Logistics." I read it 3 times before believing it wasn't spam. Yardley was a small startup that built logistics software for landscaping companies' teams managing dozens of workers, machines, and contracts. I'd read about them once in Austin Tech Weekly. They weren't flashy, but they had what I needed: a door into the tech world. I showed up for the interview wearing a thrifted white shirt from Goodwill, its collar still stiff from folding. The interviewer, Megan, the customer support lead, had curly hair and a warm smile. She asked, "Have you ever worked in tech support before?" I shook my head, but told her the truth. "I don't have a degree, but I've learned to code, and I know your platform almost by heart. If there's something I don't know, I'll learn it until I do." 3 days later, the confirmation email arrived. Offer: $36,000 divided by year. I burst into tears right there in the coffee shop. After 2 years of sleeping in my car and living on peanut butter sandwiches, it was the first time I felt like I was touching something real. I rented a small room in East Riverside, bought a secondhand desk, and taped a printed sheet on the wall that read, "Day 1 of the rest of my life." The job wasn't easy. Yardley had only 15 employees, working out of a converted warehouse. Every day, I answered dozens of customer emails. The app crashed. Can't log in. GPS keeps showing wrong location. I worked and studied at the same time, reading every old ticket to understand the product. I soon realized the problem wasn't just technical, it was structural. Users lost motivation because the onboarding process was confusing. Most took nearly 2 weeks to learn how to use the system properly. I noted everything down in my notebook, the same one I hadn't written in since leaving Ohio. At lunch, while others went out to eat, I stayed behind in the office, exploring the admin dashboard, trying to trace how users moved through the app. One afternoon, Jason, the QA lead, caught me testing errors. He laughed. Didn't expect support to poke around QA. I smiled. I was just curious why users keep hitting the same issues. He nodded. Then come help me fix a few bugs, consider it training. From that day on, I started shifting roles within the company. By day, I handled support. By night, I stayed late testing new features and documenting crash cases in detail. After a month, I wrote a short internal report and posted it on Slack, proposing a way to cut onboarding time from 14 days to 10 by simplifying the tutorial flow and adding visual guides. No one had asked me to do it, I just wanted to try. The next morning, Leo, one of the two founders, replied, "Nice idea. But do you want to prove it?" I was surprised. "Prove it?" I asked. "It means try your idea on a new group of users," Leo said. "If it works, we'll take it from there." I nodded instantly, even though I had no idea how to do it. Leo smiled. "Good, then you'll lead the pilot." For the next 3 months, I practically lived in the office. I redesigned the onboarding flow in Figma, added short videos, wrote interactive guides, and tracked results daily. I didn't have an official title, but everyone knew I was doing the work of a UX researcher without any extra pay. I didn't care. I kept telling myself, if I fail, at least I'll learn how to fail in the field I chose. By the 4th month, the results were in. Onboarding time dropped by 32%, and user retention nearly doubled. Leo called me into the meeting room, setting the report on the table. "Natalie," he said, "for the first time in 3 years, someone from support made me rethink how we build products." I laughed. I just looked at it from the user's perspective. He smiled back. "That's exactly the perspective we've been missing." A week later, they made it official. I was promoted to Associate Product Manager. When the email arrived, I sat frozen, tears welling up, not sure if it was joy or relief. 2 years ago, I had slept in my car, coding on borrowed Wi-Fi. Now I had a desk, a nameplate, a business card that said PM Natalie. That evening, I went back to the Austin Central Library and sat at the same spot where I once taught myself HTML, looking out at the Lamar Bridge glowing across the river. I opened my gray notebook and wrote beneath the vow I'd made years before. "No one will ever take my future from me again." And just below that, I added a new line. "No one can stop me from creating a new one." There. As I left the library, the night breeze brushed softly over the river, cool and gentle. I suddenly remembered my mother's words. "When you're a mother, you'll understand." I'm still not sure I understand her, but I do understand something else now. Love cannot be measured by blind sacrifice. Some families exist only to teach you how to leave, and some doors, small and quiet, open just in time to remind you that the world still has a place for you. At Yardley, I didn't have privileges. I didn't have connections. But I had something no one could steal from me: determination. And that, not a degree or a name, was what opened the very first door for me in this wide world. Working at Yardley changed my life, but it also awakened something new, a quiet, restless drive that surfaced every time I noticed a problem no one seemed willing to fix. One August afternoon, I went with Jason, my old QA lead, to Round Rock for a client visit. The company handled landscaping for luxury residential communities, employing over 200 workers. When we arrived, the sun was blazing and dust clung to our shoes. The project manager, Reed, sighed. "We have to use 6 different apps to manage progress, take inspection photos, track work reports, timesheets, vehicle schedules, and invoices. 6 apps, 6 passwords, and every time we try to compile a report, it takes a week." He scrolled through his phone, showing me Google Sheets, WhatsApp, Smartsheet, a time tracking app, a photo app, and an equipment management app. Data from the field to the office keeps breaking, reports are late, and the emails endless. As I listened, it felt like staring at a tangled map, but also at an untouched opportunity. That night, I went home and opened my laptop. One thought filled my mind: what if all those fragments could be unified into a single system? I started sketching on my wall boxes connected by arrows. In the center, I wrote, "Field Forge, the tool for the field." I didn't know where the name came from. I just knew it meant what I wanted it to forge, to craft, to build something lasting. Every night after work, I coded. At first, it was just a rough MVP, a simple app that let users create job schedules, log field updates, upload inspection photos, and generate reports for clients. I poured all my savings, nearly $18,000, into servers, UI templates, and API fees. I was terrified, but also exhilarated. Terrified of failing, but exhilarated because, for the first time, I was building something that was mine. When the first prototype was ready, I sent a link to Reed in Round Rock. "Try it out," I said. "If it helps, let me know." A week later, he called back, his voice brimming with excitement. "It works, and it's so much less of a headache." My hands trembled with joy. I didn't have a company, a team, or funding, just a tiny product running on an old laptop. But then he added, "If you ever start charging for it, I'll pay. $100 a month, it's worth it." I didn't accept right away. I just smiled and said, "Keep testing, I just need feedback." 11. The word spread faster than I ever imagined. Within 6 months, over 500 construction and landscaping crews across Texas were using Field Forge's beta version, mostly through word of mouth. I coded, debugged, and did customer support all by myself. I barely slept, but every positive email felt like a shot of pure caffeine. One night, a user messaged me, "Your app saved my contract. I didn't lose my job. Thank you." I reread that message over and over until late at night, and for the first time, I truly saw that what I built had real value. 3 months later, the user count hit 3,500. The server crashed under the load, and I had to hire a part-time developer paid on my credit card. I registered an LLC in Texas under the name Field Forge Technologies and designed a logo, a blacksmith's hammer stylized into the letter F. I chose a freemium model, free for small teams, $12 per user per month for companies with more than 10 employees. When the first payments started coming in, just a few $100s, I cried. I remembered being 19, standing in a bank parking lot, staring at that withdrawal slip showing minus $30,500. And now, every dollar I earned with my own hands felt sacred, like blood returning to my body. By the second year, Field Forge had reached an annual recurring revenue of roughly $3.2 million. I rented a small office in South Congress and hired 12 people, mostly young professionals who had been rejected by big firms for a lack of a degree. At our first onboarding session, I told them, "Here, we don't ask where you studied. We ask, what problem did you solve today?" They looked at me surprised at first, then nodded, eyes bright with something I knew well: hunger for a chance. I worked 16 hours a day. Mornings were for technical meetings, afternoons for customer support, and evenings for investor demos. I didn't spend a dime on luxury, no car, no house, no indulgence. Every dollar went back into keeping the company alive. A few angel investors began to take notice, but I wasn't ready. I wanted Field Forge to stand on its own, strong and independent, just like I'd once learned to stand alone at that rainy bus station in Dayton. I never forgot the past, but it no longer felt like a wound, it was fuel. Whenever exhaustion hit, I opened my old notebook, where the words still read, "No one will ever take my future from me again." And below that, I added a new line: "If they take away my ladder, I'll build an entire building." One afternoon, while driving past a construction site in Pflugerville, I saw a group of workers holding their phones, using Field Forge to take progress photos and upload reports. I pulled over and watched from the car. None of them knew I was the one who built what they were using, and I didn't need them to. Just seeing it was enough. In that moment, I knew my life had taken a turn I could never reverse. Field Forge wasn't just a product, it was an answer for everyone who had ever been dismissed, underestimated, or robbed of opportunity. I had once stood at the bottom, and now I was building my own foundation with the same trembling hands that once clutched my notebook in a storm, powered by a faith no one could steal. From 2020 onward, the world began to change faster than any code I'd ever written. When COVID-19 shut down offices worldwide, thousands of field teams were forced to manage operations remotely, and suddenly, FieldForge wasn't just a small app anymore. It became the connective tissue of an entire industry. I no longer had to sell door to door, people came to me. Within months, signups multiplied tenfold. The same people who once said, construction doesn't need tech, were now calling to upgrade to premium. I remember one night, around 2 a.m., watching the user count climb from 10,000 to 15, then 20,000 in just a few hours. The feeling was both overwhelming and unreal. Sitting alone in that small South Congress office, the glow of the monitor lighting my face, I realized all those years that had been taken from me were finally coming back, just in a different form. By mid-2021, our annual recurring revenue hit $28 million. For the first time, I agreed to meet with investors. A firm in Dallas invited me to fly out for Series A negotiations. I carried a 40-page deck, every cost line, retention rate, churn metric, and product roadmap laid out in detail. During the meeting, one of them asked, "If we invest $8 million at a $120 million valuation, what will you do with it?" I answered without hesitation, "I'll hire more engineers and customer support reps, because we're not just building an app, we're building trust." They stared for a moment, silent, then nodded. The deal closed 3 weeks later. I still remember the moment I signed the contract, my heart pounding, but my hands perfectly still. Maybe because I'd already signed worse papers before, like that withdrawal slip for $30,500 years ago. A year later, our Series B closed at $35 million, valuing FieldForge at $420 million. Everything moved like a whirlwind: press coverage, conferences, emails, interview requests. I had to relearn how to breathe amid the storm of success. I was no longer the waitress or the girl sleeping in her car. I was now the CEO of a tech company worth nearly $500 million. And strangely, success didn't make me euphoric, it made me calm. It felt like reaching a harbor I'd always known existed, though it had taken me years to find the way there. I moved out of my cramped South Congress apartment and bought a glass house on a hillside in Westlake Hills, overlooking a sea of green. Each morning, sunlight filtered through the glass walls and spilled across my desk, where my old gray notebook still Saturday. I never put it away, even now that I had expensive laptops and curved monitors. The messy lines I wrote back in the Austin Central Library were still there. Build your own ladder. I kept it as a reminder to never forget the first ladder that carried me out of the pit. One late March morning, my inbox pinged with an email from Fast Company. "We'd love to feature you in our Founders of the Year issue." I hesitated. I'd never liked talking about my past, especially my family. I didn't want to be remembered as the girl who overcame. I wanted to be known for the product, the process, and the people building FieldForge beside me every day. When the interview finally took place, the journalist asked, "Can you tell me about your hardships before success?" I smiled. "I don't think of it as hardship," I said. "Just a longer apprenticeship." She laughed softly. "That answer's going to make me rewrite half my article." Then came Forbes' Next 1000. They sent a crew to my house for filming. I wore a plain white shirt, no jewelry, no stylist. The interviewer tried to coax me into talking about my old wounds, my family, the stolen college fund, the so-called story of rising from adversity. I gently shook my head. "If I talk about the pain, it becomes the center of the story," I said. "I'd rather talk about how I designed a field inspection process that's 40% faster, and why blue-collar workers deserve the same respect as engineers." The reporter was quiet for a few seconds, then said, "That's the answer of an engineer, not an entrepreneur." I smiled. Exactly. I never wanted to be an entrepreneur. I just wanted to fix things. The article came out a month later with the title, "The Woman Who Built Tools, Not Walls." I don't know who chose that headline, but when I read it, my eyes stung. For the first time, I felt defined by what I'd created, not as the girl whose future was stolen, but as the woman who rebuilt it with her own hands. Sometimes, when I sit on my porch overlooking the fog-covered valley, I think back to that bus station in Dayton, the damp air, the heavy rain, the yellow light shining on two worn canvas bags. I've traveled a long, winding road to get here, not to prove anything to anyone, but to look at myself and finally smile. I'm no longer afraid of loss, because I know now. Everything can be taken except resilience and knowledge. Every morning, when I open my company inbox, I see thousands of people using Field Forge across Colorado, Arizona, even Canada. They don't know who Natalie Quinn is, and they don't need to. They only know that my tool helps them finish their work faster, easier, and to me, that's worth more than any Forbes ranking. In the glass house on the hill, I still make my black coffee, play soft jazz, and write my daily checklist. I no longer chase the thrill of victory, just one principle. Each day, I must build one more piece of that old ladder. Because I know now, that ladder was never meant for me alone. It's the foundation for everyone who was ever underestimated, overlooked, or left behind but still found the courage to stand up and say, "I will build my own way." That Monday morning began like any other. I was sitting in the second-floor conference room at Field Forge headquarters, the glass wall opening to a soft, golden view of Austin below. Our weekly product meeting had just ended when Sarah, our receptionist, knocked gently on the door, her face uneasy. "Natalie, there are 3 people waiting in the lobby. They said they're your family." I looked up, thinking I'd misheard. Names? Bill, Sharon, and Alyssa Quinn. Okay. The room went utterly still. I could hear the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. I hadn't heard those 3 names together in 10 years. My chest tightened, but my voice stayed calm. "Tell them I'll be down in 5 minutes." I stood, catching my reflection in the glass. The woman staring back was nothing like the 20-year-old girl who had left Ohio in the rain. White blouse, hair neatly tied, eyes steady and unafraid. I took a deep breath and walked out. They were sitting on the lobby sofa, smaller than I remembered. Mom wore a faded wool coat, her face lined, her hair streaked with gray. Dad looked thinner, shoulders stooped, his expression weary. And Alyssa, the so-called lost angel, looked like she'd never really found her way home. Her face was sunburned, eyes hollow, fingers trembling slightly as she twisted a cheap plastic ring around her finger. When I approached, Mom jumped to her feet. "Natalie, you look so different. Under 40. I smiled politely and nodded. "Thank you, Mom. It's been a long time." Her gaze swept across the room from the oak reception desk to the gleaming metal Field Forge logo mounted on the wall. "All of this is yours?" she asked, her voice trembling in disbelief. "Yes," I said softly. "All mine, built by me." Dad stepped forward, his voice hoarse. We read the article. Forbes, the one with your picture in front of the glass house. We had no idea you'd done so well." "How long?" Alyssa gave a crooked smile. "You're famous now. You even have your own Wikipedia page." I looked at them calmly. "Thank you for noticing. Please come upstairs." When the conference room door closed, the air felt thick, almost heavy. Mom sat down, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. Dad cleared his throat. "We didn't come just to congratulate you." I nodded. "I figured as much." He glanced at Mom, then said, "Things at home aren't good. I fell off a roof while doing a home repair job. 2 vertebrae fractured. I can't do heavy work anymore. Insurance only covers part of it. Your mom's savings are gone. And Alyssa. She's in trouble with her probation officer. The restitution from her old case still isn't fully paid. Altogether, we need about $120,000 to get through this." Silence. 10 seconds. 20. In my mind, I saw that old withdrawal slip: 30,000, $500 drained from my account. I remembered how my hands shook that day, how I cried quietly but refused to collapse. I lifted my gaze, voice calm and steady. So, $120,000. Dad nodded. You make plenty now. With your company, that kind of money must mean nothing to you. I smiled faintly. You're right. To me now, $120,000 is just 6 weeks of cloud operation costs. But 10 years ago, $30,500 was everything. It was my dream, my chance, my faith in fairness within a family, and that no one can ever repay. Mom burst into tears. Sweetheart, I know we were wrong back then. But Alyssa's changed. She's trying to rebuild her life. Please, just this once help the family. Because blood is blood. I cut her off, my voice soft as mist but sharp as glass. Blood was the reason you took my future away, and now you're using it again to ask for money. Alyssa stiffened. You talk like you're perfect. Do you have any idea what others have gone through? I looked at her, unflinching. No. But I know exactly what I went through. And unlike you, I don't use pain as an excuse to keep doing wrong. Dad interjected, trying to steady his tone. Natalie, I know we hurt you, but be reasonable. We're family. Families help each other. I looked straight at him. Family? A family is the one place where respect should exist, and that's the one thing you never gave me. The room fell silent. Only the clock ticked softly in the background. I stood, walked to the window, and looked down at the steady flow of cars along Mopac. 10 years ago, I began quietly. I left home with 2 bags. You thought I would fail, but I didn't. I learned, I worked, I built, and I created all of this not to prove anything to you, but to prove to myself that I don't need validation from those who once looked down on me. Mom wiped her tears, her voice barely a whisper. We just need a little help, Natalie. We'll pay you back. Dad. I turned to face her, calm and steady. You said that once before, just for now. And I lost everything. This time, I won't make the same mistake. Alyssa shot up from her seat, her tone sharp. You really have changed, Natalie. Now that you have money and power, you think you're better than everyone else. I met her gaze, no anger, no superiority. No, I don't think I'm better. I just learned the one lesson you never did, taking responsibility for your choices. Now, Dad looked as if he wanted to speak, but stayed silent. I poured water into 3 glasses and placed them on the table. I don't hate you, I said softly. I really don't. But I need to be clear, I don't owe anyone in this room a single dollar. And if there's anything I did owe, I've already paid it back with the years of my youth you took from me. No one responded. Mom lowered her head, tears dripping onto her hands. Alyssa stared at the floor, her lips pressed tight. I sighed, my tone softening. I wish you health, Dad. Peace, Mom. But about the money. I'm sorry. The answer is no. I walked them to the lobby. Their steps were heavy, as if dragging the weight of the past with them. When the glass doors closed behind them, Sarah looked up from the front desk, unsure. Are you okay? I smiled faintly. I'm fine, just a meeting 10 years overdue. Back in my office, the Fieldforge logo glimmered on the polished table. I whispered. 10 years ago, they took my future. Today, they came asking for more, and I was strong enough to say no. They hadn't left the parking lot yet. Through the glass wall, I could see them standing beside a gray SUV, Dad leaning against the car, back bent. Mom sitting in the passenger seat with her head down, and Alyssa, pacing, talking angrily. I knew they'd be back. And sure enough, 5 minutes later, there was another knock at the door, this time, harder. I signaled to the receptionist. Let them in. Some conversations, you already know how they'll end, but you still have to walk through them anyway. When the 3 of them walked back in, the air was different. The polite facade was gone. Alyssa's eyes were red and swollen, her voice breaking as she shouted, Why do you have to be so cruel? I didn't answer right away. Mom stepped forward, pleading. You don't have to forgive us, just help this one time. We'll pay you back, I promise. Huh. I looked at her, my tone calm but firm. No, Mom. You don't need to promise. You made that promise 10 years ago. But I've learned something since then. Forgiveness doesn't mean trust, and trust doesn't mean giving money. The room went silent again. I moved closer to the table, sat down across from them, and spoke slowly. I'm not angry anymore. Really, I'm not. I just want to understand, why didn't anyone believe in me back then? I studied hard, worked hard, stayed out of trouble. But the moment I said no, you all called me selfish. Why did responsibility, in your eyes, mean that I didn't deserve to be invested in? Dad's hands trembled slightly. He avoided my eyes. When he finally spoke, his voice was almost a whisper. Because we thought you'd be fine. You were always fine, Natalie. Alyssa, she wasn't. She needed more help. I nodded slowly. So, because I was capable, I was punished. Because I could handle things, no one ever thought to handle things for me. That was the justice of our family, wasn't it? Mom wept quietly, her hands clasped together. I know you were hurt, but back then, I didn't see another choice. Logan, no, Alyssa was facing prison. We thought if we could save one child first, we'd have time to help the other later. I met her gaze, calm and unwavering. But you never helped the other one later. You only saved the one who broke things and abandoned the one who had to live with what was broken. Alyssa slammed her hand on the table. You talk like you're so perfect. You think you're better because you didn't break the law, because you get to sit up there looking down on everyone? Without me, you wouldn't have had the drive to prove anything. You wouldn't have a story to tell. I'm the reason people admire you. Her voice cracked under the weight of her anger. I stayed seated, my eyes steady on hers. No, Alyssa. You're wrong. I would have found my way, with or without you. The only difference is I would have learned it through kindness, not pain. Dad broke the silence, his voice rough. You talk as if we're your enemies. I gave a tired smile. No, Dad. Enemies are the ones who want you to fail. Family are the ones who force you to succeed just to survive. No one spoke for a while. Only the soft sound of rain began to fall outside the glass windows. Mom's voice trembled as she finally asked, Do you ever regret it, leaving us? I answered slowly, each word slicing through the air. No, Mom. I only regret the years I wasted trying to prove I was worthy of love. Alyssa sank back into her chair, her head falling into her hands. You think you're strong, but you're just running away. I was the one who paid for everything. I was the one who got arrested, who was hated, who carried the shame. And now you have everything. So tell me, who's really the one to pity? I looked at her, my tone quiet but steady. Alyssa, if you think having everything means not hurting, then you still don't understand. Money can build a house, but it can't buy back the years stolen from you. Success can cure poverty, but not the memory of betrayal. Dad stood as if to speak, but the words never came. I walked to the door, opened it, and said softly but firmly, I don't hate you. I forgave you long ago because I didn't want to live as a prisoner of the past, but forgiveness isn't forgetting, and it's not coming back. And trust, the thing you once stole can't be bought back with a check, no matter the number written on it. Mom looked at me, tears streaming down her face. So you really can't help us? I shook my head gently, a faint, weary smile touching my lips. My boundary stands here. At this door. I don't need anyone crossing it, and I won't cross it to save anyone again. Alyssa looked at me one last time, her eyes a mix of anger and sorrow. You really have changed. You can say no so easily now. I met her gaze and whispered. It's not easy, Alyssa. It's the result of 10 years learning how not to betray myself. They left. The door closed softly, light as a breath, yet it echoed like the end of a chapter. I stood still, listening to the rain grow heavier outside. In the hallway, Sarah asked quietly, Do you want me to call a car for them? I shook my head. No need, they know the way home. Back at my desk, I opened the old gray notebook. The same words were still there. No one will ever take my future from me again. I picked up a pen and added a new line. And no one gets to buy it back with the past. 3 months passed since that morning they walked out of my office. Everything seemed to return to normal: the meetings, the product updates, the flood of emails from the tech team. But sometimes, in the quiet of an afternoon, I still heard the rain from that day, the sound of the door closing behind them, and the sigh that escaped my own chest. Maybe the wounds that don't bleed are the ones that take the longest to heal. Then Facebook started buzzing. A distant aunt, the same woman who hadn't asked if I was alive or dead for a decade, posted a long status. "Family is forever. Blood is thicker than water." Underneath, dozens of relatives commented, nodding along, calling me ungrateful, saying I'd forgotten my roots now that I'm rich. I read every comment, no anger, just a hollow quiet inside. 10 years of silence, and now they spoke as if they'd always been experts in morality. I didn't reply publicly. Instead, I sent a private message to Evan, my younger cousin, the one who'd let me sleep in his garage the night I left home. "Thank you for that night," I wrote. "Without you, I don't think I would have had the courage to keep going." He replied a few minutes later. "I'm proud of you. Don't let anyone make you forget what you've survived." News about my old family came in quiet waves. A high school friend texted, "Heard Alyssa got arrested again. Probation violation. Drugs, I think." I read it, feeling the heaviness in my chest. Not anger, just a deep, tired kind of sadness. As for my parents, I heard they were close to losing the house. Dad couldn't keep up with the payments after his injury, and Mom had sold nearly everything they owned. Some relative reached out, suggesting I lend a hand to help them keep their home. I replied simply, I already gave them the most precious thing I had, and they couldn't keep it. Now, I only have my peace, and I intend to keep that. One March morning, I went to therapy for the first time in years. The room was small, soft beige walls, a velvet couch, the faint scent of lavender oil drifting through the air. Claire, the therapist, a calm woman in her 50s, asked gently, "Natalie, what made you decide to come in today?" I thought for a moment, then said quietly, "Because I forgave them, but I haven't forgiven myself." She nodded. "Then that's where we'll begin." Bah. My first assignment was to write a letter I would never send to Natalie at 20, the girl who left the Dayton bus station in the rain with 2 bags and no plan. That evening, back in my home office, sunlight slanted through the glass wall and spilled across my desk. I opened the old gray notebook to a blank page. My hand trembled slightly as I began to write. "Dear you, the girl who thought responsibility meant carrying the whole world. You were right to leave. You were wrong to believe love must always cost everything. You deserve to be loved without proving, to be free without asking. You don't owe them forgiveness, but you owe yourself grace for staying too long." By the time I reached the last line, the tears came. Not out of pain but relief. For years I'd carried the image of the responsible child, the one who believed that if she worked a little harder, maybe her parents would finally see her, maybe love would follow. But the truth is, love doesn't come from endurance. It comes when you finally walk away. After that session, I began small rituals of peace, turning off my phone on Friday nights, walking along Lady Bird Lake, listening to old jazz, and journaling without judgment. Slowly, I began to understand that healing isn't about forgetting. It's about looking back and feeling no urge for revenge. One afternoon, I received an email from the bank. My parents' mortgage had officially gone into foreclosure. I read it carefully, then deleted it. Not out of indifference, but because I knew. If I saved them now, they'd forget the lesson again, and I'd slip back into being the responsible child one more time. I had promised the 20-year-old girl in that letter that I would never betray her again. That night, I brewed a cup of peppermint tea and sat on the porch of my glass house. A light rain fell over Austin. The air smelled of soil and wildflowers. I thought of Alyssa maybe sitting in some small cell somewhere, believing her sister had turned cold. I didn't feel joy in that thought, only a quiet hope that someday she'd understand. Freedom doesn't come from being forgiven. It comes from taking responsibility. In therapy, Claire once said, "When you can look at your past without shaking, you've already escaped." That line loosened something deep inside me. I no longer saw my parents as betrayers, but as frightened people, weak, ruled by their own fear. They chose to save the wrong child because they feared shame, judgment, failure. They weren't evil, just too afraid to be fair. And I, the girl who once lived to be dependable, finally understood. Being dependable doesn't mean endless sacrifice. I have the right to be weak. The right to leave. The right to choose myself first. 3 months later, in my final therapy session, Claire asked, "If you could say one thing to your 20-year-old self, what would it be?" I smiled, my voice trembling. I'd say, "Thank you for walking away that rainy night, because without you, there wouldn't be me today." That evening, I closed the gray notebook and placed it on the shelf by the window. Wind brushed through the pine trees on the hill, lifting the thin curtain. I whispered softly, to no one but myself. No one will ever take my future. And no one defines my kindness except me. Under the quiet night, I knew at last, the silence inside me was no longer a wound, but peace. The next morning, dawn spread over Westlake Hills in a soft golden haze, thin as breath. Light streamed through the glass walls, spilling across the oak kitchen counter where the coffee machine began to drip its steady, warm rhythm. I leaned against the counter, listening to the sound, breathing in the scent. The smell of beginnings, the smell of days where I no longer have to run. On the wall before me, I'd retaped the old sticker whose corners had started to curl with time. "Build your own ladder." The letters had faded, but the meaning never had. I opened my laptop and looked at the document I'd finished the night before. Fieldforge Fellowship, the vocational scholarship program I'd been dreaming of for over a year. 15 spots each year, reserved for young women from low-income neighborhoods who want to learn project coordination in the construction field. It covered OSHA 10 certification, Procore basics, and even Excel for project management. I wanted them to know that construction sites weren't just for men, and that even small, determined hands could build something monumental, if given a chance. I sent the proposal to the legal team, then poured myself another cup of coffee. The house was quiet, filled only with the whisper of wind through the pine trees outside and the soft rhythm of my typing. A part of me still remembered Ohio, the bus station on that rainy night, the 20-year-old girl standing with 2 bags between despair and beginning. But now I could look back and smile, not bitterly, not wistfully, but with gratitude. In my mind, my own voice echoed slow, steady, like the closing line of a long journey. I can't buy back the past, but I can design the future. I forgive, but I don't owe. And family, if it's truly family, must put respect before blood. Third note. I gently closed the old gray notebook, now thick with sketches, diagrams, and messy notes from those early days. On the last page, I added one small line. "Legacy isn't what you inherit, it's what you rebuild." Then I placed it on the shelf, right beside the 2 old canvas bags, the same ones I had carried out of that house 10 years ago. Now they hung neatly beside the framed photo of Fieldforge's first team. In the soft morning light, they no longer looked worn or ragged, but like 2 medals, symbols of a journey once dismissed as ungrateful, yet defined by the courage to choose myself. Outside, the sun rose higher, washing the green hillside in gold. I lifted my coffee cup, watched the dew evaporate on the glass, and knew at last everything was exactly where it belonged.